But before it gets started, my lawyers have asked that I show a disclaimer. And you're not going to be able to read this. I can't read it. I can barely understand it. But in a nutshell, essentially what it says, I will be making some forward-looking statements. And you shouldn't be investing on what I say. So hopefully this will keep me out of the hooskow and also keep you from making some bad investments. Anyway, I am very happy to be here. And I flew in last night from Houston. So the flight was uneventful, which is great. Because last time I flew into Houston, I was coming in from Europe, and we flew, got close to Houston, and then we circled and circled because of bad weather there. And eventually we had to divert the flight to New Orleans so we could refuel, which we did. We landed and started the refueling, and the attendant got on and said, well, you can start up your devices. And all of a sudden there's this mad din of all these devices starting up, chirps and beeps and swishes. Everybody is turning on their iPods, Blackberries, et cetera, making calls back home saying they're going to be late. And you could also hear the noise from the refueling. And it really struck me. And here I'm in the energy business, and I was just thinking, this is how we use energy. This, we use it to stay connected. We use it to get from point A to point B. You use it to stay warm, keep cool. And I think it also struck me, being in the energy business, that I also take it for granted. I think just like everybody else. And it really dawned on me that I think of all the things that we do, this is one of the more important aspects of our lives, is working with energy. And it affects us every day. So when we think about energy and how it really powers society and drives our country, drives the United States, I think I need to reflect, and I think all of us need to reflect about the fact that we really can't take it for granted. We just can't. And the dilemma is that when we have energy discussions in the U.S., at least the ones I've seen and been involved with, and it reminds me of a quote from an old Italian novel, The Leopard, and I'm sure some of you read this. But there's a great quote. If we want things to stay as they are, things will have to change. So think about that. If we want things to stay as they are, things will have to change. And I think the point here is if we aspire, and I'm sure we all do, certainly we all do in this room, to have a secure and a diverse energy supply. And if we want more growth of renewables, and I think we all do, and we want more responsible development at reasonable costs and improved energy efficiency. And we're in a world where the demand is increasing. We're expecting global consumption to increase by 56% in 2040. So all these things, I guess, lead me to the conclusion that we can't take our energy for granted any longer. And we need to be aggressively pursuing all sources of energy and all sources of efficiencies for years to come, just to really keep up. So, as a group, we've got the burden of responsibility as energy suppliers and regulators and explorers, policymakers, to supply energy for our country's needs. And for now, but also in the future. And so we need to be thinking ahead. And I think we have to be asking ourselves the question, honestly, are we really keeping up as we move forward to the future? And when you think about the energy discussions that we have, and unfortunately we're sort of seeing this played out in short term on some other matters this week, but it's just mired in indecision. These discussions are polarized very frequently. People are on opposite sides of the table. We talk about delays. We don't see a lot of progress. And I guess my perspective, and maybe I'm a bit idealistic with all of this, is that I think we can change this. Frankly, I think we have to change this if we're going to want to keep things the same. And we have to initiate this change in the very beginning. And what I think needs to happen, and I'll talk a little bit more about this as well, is that we approach the discussion with the various stakeholders and parties, not as opponents, but as partners with different perspectives. And I think from that perspective, we can have productive discussions. And we can talk about energy supply in a meaningful way, and so that we can keep up in the future. And it's about partnering. And it's also about being innovative, and it's about making the best use of available technology. So today, and we've already heard about some of the other energy mixes, and we're going to hear more about gas and how all of the different energies types are important for our future. I'm going to focus on oil, and I'm going to focus on the offshore. And really, from that perspective, it's about how we can move forward with exploration and development in a safe way, in a responsible manner, and how we can do this efficiently. So let's start with a graph here. This is going to be the only graph I'm going to show. But it reflects on the good news, and I'll talk a little about what this is actually showing in a second. But the good news, if you look at oil and gas production domestically here in the U.S., it has been increasing. And it's grown from about 6.5 million barrels per day in 2012 to projected 8.2 million barrels a day next year in 2014. And partly as a consequence, we're seeing that the net imports of liquid fuels has declined and continues to decline. So it peaked in 2005 with an import of about 12.5 million barrels per day. And now in 2012, we were down to 7.4 million barrels a day. And that is going to continue to decline. The U.S. Energy Information Administration, the EIA, is that this will decline, but even with that decline, by 2040, the net liquid imports are still going to be about 40% of our total supply. So we have a situation where domestic production is up. The renewables are continuing to grow. We've got oil coming from liquid-rich shales, gas coming from shale gas as well onshore. And all of this is great. We need every single drop of it. We need it because this is the only way we're going to be able to keep up. And frankly, regardless of how you look at this, we have to have essentially understanding that oil is going to be the backbone of energy. So it will be part of our energy mix in the future. And we're looking at a situation also where the rest of the globe is growing significantly, and where we are going to be in a situation where we're competing for supply, as we already are. We're seeing, particularly in India and China, demand grow. And in fact, this fall, any day now, we're actually going to see China surpass us as the largest net oil importer. And the market's going to adjust. The markets find a way, and they can do that quickly. But as far as being able to produce quickly, explore and produce quickly, that just doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. So if we want to meet our demand in 2040, and go back to this slide, I said I'd get back to it. If you look at the right-hand side, that's 2040. So we're looking from 2010 to 2040, and the red is showing oil. Basically, oil is going to be part of this. And if we want it to be part of it, we're going to have to get moving with greater development opportunities that have been identified. And we have to develop these opportunities because it takes time. And it takes time from the perspective of, if you look at an offshore deepwater development, and I'm just talking with industry about industry averages here, it will take from lease to first oil roughly 10 years. And the costs for these developments, for exploration and developments, are significant. So a single deepwater well averages these days between $100 and $200 million each. A deepwater platform, the platform itself is about $2 billion each. Pipelines, are costing hundreds of millions of dollars depending on where they sit. And so when you look at an overall deepwater development, it's costing in the range of about $5 to $10 billion. So this takes quite a bit of nerve, and it takes obviously quite a bit of money to move forward with investments like this. And they have to be planned well in advance. And it's fundamental that the fiscal terms are there so that these developments can move forward and support the cash flow that's required to actually make an investment like that profitable. And I think importantly, the tax provisions that we've had in the U.S. have played a very important role in the domestic energy renaissance, which we're seeing played out. And it's a key driver to the economic growth that we hopefully will see in the future. Right now, in the Gulf of Mexico, we're experiencing a renaissance. We're sharing part of that renaissance in the western and central parts of the Gulf of Mexico. And that's primarily due to the new technologies and the collaborative approach that we've taken with various partners and regulators to move forward with the exploration and production activities. And we're, in Shell, very proud to be part of that renaissance. And we have more drilling activity right now in the Gulf of Mexico than any other operator. And we've had recent discoveries at Appomattox, Vito, Vicksburg, and North Yucatan. Many of these I'm sure you've seen in the headlines. So that's great. It's wonderful that we've had these successes. But I'd ask you the question, is it enough? And I think my answer is no. We need more. We're missing some critical areas in the U.S., and specifically the eastern Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic margin, which are currently off limits for exploration and production. And we're ignoring the potential billions of barrels of oil. A 2009 government study estimated that the eastern Gulf of Mexico alone could hold approximately 9 billion barrels. And in the Atlantic margin, we're estimating about the same. But the issue here is that it's really hard to be confident about these estimates, because the fact is that the data that we have, the 2D seismic data, is 30 years old. It's mainly up in the shallow water. And frankly, we're just unsure of what could be out there in the deeper water, which may be more prospective. And so wouldn't it be cool if we could get out there and take another look at the potential resource lying off the Atlantic margin? And I think particularly looking at those areas in the deep water, 50 to 100 miles offshore, which is farther than we can see from the coast. So we've talked about the good news, and we've talked about the potential that we see, but let's address some of the challenges here. So while we in the U.S. are ignoring significant domestic resources, our neighbors to the north and to the south are moving forward and exploring and developing their resources. For example, in 2012, right next door in Nova Scotia, there's an offshore lease sale, and for 4 blocks, basically they generated $1 billion of work commitment. And so obviously since then they've continued to lease, and there's been considerable interest there. Moving south, recently the President of Mexico announced that he's going to move forward with the Energy Reform Act. And this would open up the petroleum sector in Mexico to foreign investment. And there are estimates that there could be 100 billion barrels in Mexico that are waiting to be untapped. So this is generating a lot of interest globally. A lot of people are watching to see how this story is unfolding. And if you look at this map, you'd probably expect that Venezuela and Brazil would be on this. But I also want to point out there are new and developing areas along the Atlantic margin, above and beyond the countries that we know. And so the places like Trinidad and other countries in the Caribbean, Guyana, Suriname, Colombia, Uruguay, Argentina, all of these are in various stages of offshore exploration and development. And Shell, we're involved in many of these countries. And I can tell you firsthand that none of these countries are just allowing their waters to be exploited. They are ensuring that the drilling and development is being moved forward with robust regulatory controls and the robust environmental review structures in place. And what's interesting about this, actually ironic, is that they're learning from countries with more mature regulatory systems, like the US and like Norway. So here we are in a situation where other countries to the north and south are basically using American standards, regulatory practices, and to compete for the resources while we're sitting on the sidelines and allowing investment capital and jobs and tax revenues and greater economic stability to flow to other countries. So I ask you the question again, is that helping us keep up? So let me focus a little bit on Brazil, and it's an excellent example of a country's determination to use its resource base to prepare for the future. And a few years ago, geologists had the idea that there might be oil and gas trapped under a layer of salt offshore Brazil. And so they conducted seismic surveys, which confirmed the potential, and eventually went out and drilled some wells. And although the initial well didn't pan out, others did. And subsequently, there was a significant resource that has been delineated offshore Brazil in this pre-salt area. And we're looking at a resource base with tens of billions of barrels of oil. And so I think that's pretty cool. They persevered, they stuck with it, and now they've got a huge resource base that's underpinning economic development. And it's also compelling because Brazil is harnessing this resource in such a way that it is really moving forward with rebuilding their economy. And for example, one block that is going to be auctioned off, matter of fact, on the 21st of October this month, they're looking for a minimum bid of $7 billion. Yeah, that's billion with a B for one block. And the idea is that this is going to underpin their programs for education, support research, and other strategic projects to move Brazil forward. So, in that perspective, in the US, do you think we're keeping up? That's an unprecedented investment, this example from Brazil. And I think you can understand why energy companies like Shell are very careful about how and when we invest in this type of opportunity. It's a lot of money. But we also realize that we need to explore for and produce natural resources in a safe and an environmentally sound manner. And regardless of location across the globe, I'll tell you that the 2010 Macondo incident changed offshore exploration and production for good. And since then, we've seen a change in the mindset. We've seen collaboration, and we've seen partnerships grow. We've seen new industry safety standards, and I mentioned those previously, implemented. And we've seen step changes in prevention, intervention, and response. And it's really a function of the advances that we've seen with regards to the technology and the utilization of this technology. And that's really improved how we move forward with safety in offshore exploration. So, as a specific example here in the US, after Macondo and the months after, the new government regulatory agencies were established, such as the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement and the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. And at the time, I was leading Shell's effort to get back to work in the Gulf of Mexico, to work with these groups, and to do it safely. So real focus on collaboration, but also a real recognition that we needed to employ the right technologies to enable us to explore and produce safely. And so we work together as operators, regulators, government officials, communities, and we approach the situation, I think, in a very much a partner-based approach. And we are determined to find a way for the industry to improve and move forward to deliver that energy resource from the Gulf of Mexico. And we partnered and raised the bar at the same time with regards to how we can do a development of these offshore resources safely. So as a result, the Marine Well Containment Company is up and running. And Shell was a founding member of this industry consortium and developed and maintains a containment system that's out there right now for underwater well control response. And we've tested this system in a full mobilization exercise where we placed a capping stack in a simulated well at 7,000 foot of water. So a great example of technology. The Center for Offshore Safety, which helps companies thoroughly and objectively audit their safety and environmental management systems, is in full operation. And perhaps the most recent example of partnering, innovating, and utilizing this technology is Marine Vibe. And here's where Total, Exxon, and Shell are working together to use low-frequency vibration technologies to minimize underwater noise during seismic surveys. Shell has been proud to be involved in all of these initiatives. These are game-changing. Industry partnering has produced some amazing discoveries, and we look forward to working with those outside of our industry to really search for new ideas and perspectives. So Shell has been collaborating with companies like Intel and IBM to help transform our analysis of the enormous amount of data that we get from seismic acquisition, and to use this in a way that we can actually visualize the subsurface in a more accurate and realistic way, and need the technologies to allow us to render those images so that we can do it. And this may mean that we're partnering with companies that are working in Hollywood, companies that have made Avatar, so that we get the right tools that we can actually do the visualization. So here's some examples of what we could do with the right partners. Shared those with you. But innovation is important, and it's great that it's cool, but it's much more important and fundamental when it's compelling as well. And we need a purpose behind this. And I want to talk about our Perdido platform in the Gulf of Mexico. So Perdido is an 8,000 foot of water depth in the western Gulf of Mexico. And it's the first and deepest combined drilling and production platform in the world. It also has the world's deepest subsea well, the deepest spar, and the deepest subsea pipeline. And the list goes on. And that's cool. What's compelling about this is that the Perdido development was made possible through a series of technology firsts. And this crossed a whole range of disciplines. And these firsts are how we're going to lead on to the future. That these are going to basically provide the steps for the next set of technologies that will enable us to keep up. But we have to change the way we approach the discussion around energy. If we partner and work together, we're going to be able to move forward, I think. And it's going to help us keep up. And it's going to help us actually prepare for the future. And we need to act now, to be honest. And in my view, we need to act really in three areas. The first is that we have to include today's off-limit areas in the next 5-year plan. We need to do this so we can access and explore these significant opportunities that are sitting out there, particularly in the eastern Gulf of Mexico, in the mid and south Atlantic margin of the US. You can see that gap on the map. I'd like to see that gap filled. The second is to share revenues with the coastal states with existing or planned offshore development. And this has already happened in the Gulf of Mexico. This is an enabler. Everybody has some skin in the game. And third is to adopt performance-based regulatory oversight, just like other countries have done, so that we move forward and essentially manage safety on a risk basis. So I would argue that these are not bold steps, but they're critical if we're going to meet our future energy demand. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a choice. You know, we can choose to sit on the sidelines right now, and just like a spectator at a football game. And we can watch as our neighbors to the north and south move forward and explore and develop their offshore resources. Or we can work together. We can work together towards a common goal of safely, responsibly, and efficiently harnessing the benefits of our resources for our country. So, at the end of the day, you know, the intention should be to keep up. And America's energy future is important, and we can't take this for granted any longer. We have to act. Because if we want things to stay the same, we better start changing the way we're doing things. So thank you.